Welcome to the RiVeR Project podcast series. I'm delighted to be here today with Eve McDowell. Eve is an advocate, an activist, and currently working in University of Galway as part of the Active Consent Project as a Communications and Engagement Officer. So Eve, thank you so much for agreeing to do the podcast. We're delighted to be here with you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on.
Thank you, Eve. So I want to start, Eve, by asking you, what inspired you to campaign for the introduction of legislation in relation to stalking?
Yeah, so back in 2019, I went through my own personal experience of stalking, which was horrific, and then going through the court case was horrific. And by the time everything was done and finished and over, I just wanted to, be done with it and never think about it again, basically. I thought it was really not something that happened often in Ireland. I hadn't heard of many other cases at all. There were no websites or information out there with, anything to do with. I think it took a very long time to even name it as stalking. So when my case was finished, I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done. Try and move on. And then during COVID, I was sitting in work going through Facebook videos or something, and I seen the video of Una Ring doing her first TV interview about her case, and I just couldn't believe that someone had gone through, in a way, something so similar. But then again, we had differences in our cases. How our cases were handled were really different. But I just knew I needed to speak to her instantly, so tried to find her online. Impossible to do, because when you've been stalked, you kind of get used to removing your social media, becoming non-contactable. But eventually I did get through to her, which was brilliant. So the first time we spoke for 2 or 3 hours about how we couldn't believe that there was a website, we couldn't believe that there were supports, we couldn't believe that another person had gone through this, couldn't believe how differently our cases were treated by Gardaí and things like that. But most importantly, we couldn't believe how there was no stalking legislation that was standalone, and that we couldn't access some sort of restraining order or protection order. So we just knew from that point on that something had to change. So really it was Una who inspired me from the get-go to that maybe, okay, we could actually try and do something about this. And I think both of us had this burst of energy in wanting to, move on and do something positive with this. So from that point on, we started gathering information for our website, speaking to different organisations that might have some knowledge on it, speaking to different academics that have a bit of a background on it. We knew that the Law Reform Commission had recommended there should be a standalone stalking offence in 2016. So looking into, who proposed that, can we talk to them, why hasn't it been followed up on? And, simultaneously we were telling our own personal stories in length constantly to the media, because we just knew that we needed people to listen. Because it's one point saying that, okay, we need the legislation here, but until people really understand why the current legislation wasn't working. We did have the harassment legislation that was from 1997, but the more I opened up about my story and the more Una opened up about her story, we started getting floods of people trying to contact us as well. So then we realised how big the issue was, realised that the current legislation wasn't working for people. And I think, from that point on, we, initially we were like, oh, it would be great if we could set up a website, but then it grew to more like, no, I think we need to try and tackle this and really push for a standalone offence.
Wow, that's really inspiring, Eve, because as you said at the beginning there, in your own experience there, and, there wasn't a huge amount of information out there, and yet you were part of creating a space for other people to be able to acknowledge what they were going through or had been going through, and the gaps in responses. So, there's many people that are feeling safer because of your work there in that area. You'd also mentioned a little bit about, I suppose really the information that's out there. So I think what would be helpful to our listeners as well is if you wouldn't mind, could you define stalking for us?
Yeah, of course. So the way that I define stalking is by using the anagram 4 that came from a detective in the UK, I believe, that came up with the explanation that it's any pattern of behaviours or a behaviour, it could be just one thing, that's fixated, obsessive, unwanted and repeated. So once you have those elements, the behaviour could look like almost anything. That's what makes stalking different to other crimes, or I think it has a lot of crossover with coercive control as well, because from the outside looking in, it could look like something small, like leaving people flowers or sending people presents. And if you don't understand the intention behind that, then these things can have massive impacts on people. And when we try to go deeper into it and understand why people stalk and the motivations, there's 5 groupings or categories of stalker motivations. So we have the rejected is the most common, so that's usually around 80% male. Post-relationship breakdown or a perceived rejection in a romantic relationship, that's the most common type. Nearly half of cases will fall under that category. And then you have the resentful, which is when the perpetrator believes that the victim or survivor has wronged them in some way and they want to create fear. And then with that typology, you see a lot of property damage or threats to friends and family or pets, things like that. Then you have the intimacy seeker, which is almost an equal gender balance, which is interesting. So there'll be around 40% women perpetrating that one. And that is where the stalker believes that the victim is in love with them and they're seeking to establish an emotional connection. And they really, truly believe that person wants to as well, even if they've been rejected. And then you have the incompetent suitor, which isn't a nice name, but it's usually people with poor social skills and poor communication skills that might not understand that they are stalking. So with those people, sometimes they're trying to establish a friendship, sometimes they're trying to establish a romantic relationship, but it's a lot shorter timeline of stalking. So it might go away faster, someone might be able to help intervene. And then you have the predatory stalker, which is the most dangerous type, usually perpetrated by men as well. And they'll get to know their victim from afar. So they'll start gathering information on them, a lot of watching, spying, following, whether that's online or in person. And then usually the end goal with predatory is a serious sexual assault, rape or murder. So that's, is the most kind of serious type. So having an understanding of those motivations helps us to understand stalking more. But I wouldn't say as well that every case someone will have, their stalker will fit into one of those categories. There could be overlap, could be, a bit of 2, a bit of 1. And then, since then there's been different categories suggested as well. So it's something that doesn't have much research behind it. And I think, it's really important why we keep talking about it and bringing it up, because in the UK, 1 in 5 women will experience stalking in their lifetime and 1 in 10 men will. And then in other studies in the US, it says 1 in 5 women and 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men. So it's a really, really common thing. So it was really interesting that it wasn't spoken about much, and that it's not understood by a lot of people as well. And I think now that we have the online world and since COVID, there's been so many more tools that people can use to stalk.
Absolutely,
Yeah, and I think sometimes people don't even realise they're stalking another person. But when you become fixated and obsessed with someone's day-to-day routine, or feeling like you need to have control over how they're feeling or what they're doing or who they're seeing, or think that you're entitled to be able to see them, that's where we see a lot of crossover with coercive control and things. So, it's quite a broad area.
Yeah, it sounds like a very complex area. And, that in itself, understanding that at a deeper level for people will certainly support those who need support, and make us all a little bit more aware, because I'm sure not many people would have considered that 1 in 5 for women, 1 in 10 for men, that's very prevalent. Probably much more prevalent than people would think about.
Absolutely. And then sometimes I have people saying to me, oh, you know, heard about your case, so sorry, what happened? Oh, I had a thing happen to me. It wasn't really stalking. And then they'll go on to tell me about a time that they were stalked. And it's interesting that so many people have experienced it but didn't name it. And I used to live next door to an older woman in her 70s, and after doing interviews and coming out about my story, she got really upset the next time I seen her and said, I've actually gone through that, but I didn't have the words and I was never able to tell anyone. She said back then people just called stalkers peeping toms, or, you know, different, you know, little bit odd but harmless. This kind of like societal or cultural thing where it's like, oh no, don't talk about it. It's not like they're actually going to do anything. And that was something that a lot of people said to me during my case as well. It's like, oh, yeah, he's a bit strange, but it's not like he's actually going to do anything. So yeah, that's why I think we need an understanding of those typologies or their motivations, and the impacts that can have on people as well.
Oh, totally. Because you're absolutely right, and I can. What's bringing to mind is other types of abuse and how that the language around that. It can be a struggle for people to name it, but also the misconceptions actually make it so much more difficult for people to come forward when people don't understand it or minimise it.
Absolutely.
So what you're doing in terms of raising awareness around that, I'd imagine is very freeing for a lot of people to be, even your neighbour there speaking, being able to talk about that years later and putting a name to what she'd gone through. So, you know, this is going to sound like a strange question, but considering everything that you've said there, but I am going to ask you, why did you think it was important to have stalking named in legislation?
So, you know, when we first started speaking about this publicly and when radio stations were picking it up and news outlets, the Department of Justice was asked to comment, and then Justice Minister McEntee responded and said that the harassment legislation had been updated, that they had increased the sentencing from 10 to 7 years, and that, you know, it can be prosecuted under harassment. But you know, what we were really trying to push was the difference between harassment and stalking, because I don't want to minimise anyone that goes through harassment's experience, because that can be really awful as well. But usually the end game or the motivations behind them can be really different, which is why it's so important to have that piece and have it named. I think as well for the guards to understand, because, you know, the guards go through Templemore and they have training on so many different areas. I can imagine it can be hard for them to retain all that information as well. So for them to be able to, you know, put in a report and look and see that it is that and know that there is a law that they can implement there is super important. Same, you know, for the DPP. Even in terms of capturing how many stalking cases there are in Ireland, because we don't have much data at all. So, you know, for us to be able to, when someone goes in to report it, to have record of how many cases are happening. Also, we knew that in Scotland, when they introduced a standalone offence, reporting increased massively. So that, you know, was a big motivation to keep fighting for it as well. And as well for victims to be able to look at the legislation and say, yeah, that was something that happened to me. And we were a little bit behind in Ireland compared to other countries. Australia has been making improvements on their stalking legislation. The UK, you know, there's fantastic work being done within certain police sectors there, although people in England will say that they're really far behind. And then we're over here being like, oh, but we're trying to catch up with you. So there is progress happening. It's slow. But I think, naming it in the legislation was really important as that first step towards taking it seriously and validating victims' experiences as well.
Oh, absolutely. There is something really important about a behaviour being an offence, and that messaging is really clear in terms of, you know, that's not acceptable, and that there are consequences. So I can see how that would be really powerful for victim survivors. So that journey, that campaign journey, Eve, so can you talk a little bit about maybe what supports were there? You know, what was encouraging during that journey?
I I think a lot of people were really supportive. Me and Una received like outpourings of support when we went public with our stories, which was amazing. I was really nervous about going public, but you know, after meeting Una and understanding that there was a possibility for change to be made, and then doing it and having the support was amazing. It was really nice. But then also there's kind of a catch-22, because if you've been stalked, you don't really love being in the public eye, or the idea of people knowing you and you not knowing them is a little bit scary. So while the support is really positive, there was mixed I'm not sure about Una, but for me anyways, which was an interesting thing. But what was really important was we had support from a lot of organisations, and to have organisations take accountability to say, oh yeah, we actually don't have any resources on this. I think it was eye-opening for a lot of people, which was brilliant. And you know, it was a struggle initially to get the Department of Justice on board, but once they were on board, we were very much included in the progress of the development of the legislation, which was great. And then we had academics from UCC help draft the legislation. We had, you know, people from the Law Reform Commission step in. We held a webinar and had the members of the Garda Protective Service units there. So, I mean, it was great. And then just like people who were also in the activist space as well, checking in to say, look, if you need to take a break with the media, make sure you take a break and take a rest. That was really important as well, because you do, you know, go through burnout when you're going over your same story over and over again. So having people who had experienced that be able to give you the heads up, even though probably didn't listen to them at the time, but there was a lesson learned in that. So yeah, even though it was a long journey, the support was far and wide.
Oh, that's and rightly so. I mean, you're speaking about an horrendous experience and sharing that with the wider community, and just to try and make change for others. So yes, absolutely, the support. It's really great to hear that people were there with guidance, even if you didn't. But sometimes we just have to, you know,
learn things ourselves.
Yeah, this is so true.
Yeah.
So maybe on the flip side of that, then, Eve, what didn't work well? What barriers, if any, did you encounter?
Well, I think, and just to add one more, to support Senator Lisa Chambers was fantastic. She heard us on the radio and contacted us, and her background was as a barrister, and you know, the whole way through she was fantastic. But I suppose, yeah, when we went with her as the politician we were going to be working with, it was interesting. You had people around us, because she was aligned with Fianna Fáil, or, you know, a certain political party. We had some people around us, or, you know, more in the left space, say, oh, well, why would you work with her? Why not work with other politicians from other parties? And I remember Una saying, I don't care if it's the postman, like if there's someone passionate about bringing this forward.
If it gets done.
Yeah, because you kind of have to learn to put your, you know, sometimes political stances aside for the greater good, which was another great learning in that as well. But then, yeah, in terms of barriers, the Justice Department did not want to take it up at first. It was kind of a closed down, I suppose, any time that they were asked about it. I think a real watershed moment for the country was the Aisling Murphy case, which was so tragic at the time. I think it really impacted society as a whole. The amount of secondary trauma from that case was huge at the time, and there was a lot of violence against women in the news. So I think, you know, that was the time where so many people stood outside the Dáil and demanded that more change would come. So a little while after that is when we got the call, and, you know, commitment from the Department of Justice to say, okay, we're going to listen. So that was great to get that then. But I mean, we had drafted the first bill that had gone through the Seanad, so it just had to go to the Dáil next. But when we were at that stage, and when Justice decided, yeah, we are going to support it, they wanted to draft another bill, which at the time was really frustrating because, God, it had been months and we were halfway through the legislative process. And, you know, we had people that were waiting and waiting on this to come through so that they could report their stalker. You know, they were holding out because they knew that maybe this legislation would provide better protections than the harassment legislation. So having the pressure of talking to people who are being directly impacted on a daily basis, and then you're trying to put pressure on it to keep it moving. So we were really frustrated at that point. But when we were invited up then to review the legislation, we really were listened to, and we spoke about the civil protection orders, and they were going to be included in this version of the bill. So, you know, we had to weigh up the options, and we decided that, yeah, like it would be better if we had stronger legislation going forward, especially after talking to people that advocate and are activists in the stalking space in the UK. They had said, no, that if you can amend your legislation before it goes in, it's going to make it a whole lot easier, because to try and get it back on the record again, the government are dealing with so many things every day, and you know, this is really, really vitally important, but there are other issues that are really, really vitally important as well. So trying to keep it topical at the time as well was a big pressure, especially if there's, you know, other major events like how COVID-19 was happening. So in a way that maybe worked to our advantage, because the world was a little bit shut down, so we had the space to be able to open up and talk about this. But anyways, yeah, so then that has to go back to the start of the legislative process all over again. So we were back at stage one, and then, you know, summer hits and the doll's out for recess, and there's all these different breaks, and you know, the government year is like the academic year, but I think even shorter again. So you're holding out saying, you know, when is this due next? When is this scheduled next? And then the day that we thought it was going to pass the final stage, we landed up. And I remember me and Una saying to each other, I just feel like it's not going to happen today. And sure enough, it didn't. There was an amendment that came in last minute. So that's really frustrating as well when you're talking to people who are, again, waiting for it to come through. And you've publicly said it's passing the last stage today. And then, oh, wait, there's one more thing. But I think by the time that it actually did go through, everyone was like, oh, are you so excited now? I was like, no, I'm just relieved. We were both so, you know, tired at that point, but such a sigh of relief.
Yeah, I'd imagine you had lots of different feelings at that point, and it was a lengthy journey.
Yeah.
And I suppose really, like in thinking about all of the different experiences of it's moving far, you know, it's moving so far, then, you know, you're back to the start. And even though the guidance was that it would be maybe a stronger piece of legislation, but still that I can imagine that would at some point, like on some level, be quite taxing on your emotions.
Yeah.
But can you tell us then, so what happened then after that? So
well, yeah, now it was like a now what moment. Obviously there was still the civil protection orders which had to come in, so they would take longer, and there's always work to be done. But I think I kind of reassessed what I was doing with my life then, because I had been in retail management, dropped out of college, didn't really see myself going back to college for ages. I was like, oh no, I'll probably just keep working away. I preferred the prospect of being able to have a bit of money than have to be a broke student again.
Oh, of course. So would you think that the experience in the activism, in the advocate space, influenced then your career goals?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I started applying for jobs because I was like, okay, well, I've worked with the Department of Justice and I've done this, so like surely I have enough experience with my work experience to move into that space. But what I found is that you do need qualifications to get into a lot of jobs. I know there's some equal opportunity employer positions, but I just wasn't, I had really closed myself off, I realised, to a lot of opportunities and a lot of jobs that I really felt that I could do well in. But, you know, in hindsight, going back to education was definitely the best thing for me. So I had been on the Active Consent podcast, actually, funny enough, a few years ago. And then I made an application to join the module that Active Consent run. It'll kill me now for not remembering the long title. But yeah, it's a level 9 module, like 10 credits on consent education, which was, you know, a bit different to the stalking space. But yeah, I really wanted to expand my knowledge, I think, just around domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. So I made an application for that. And at the same time, this was, you know, still during COVID, so everything was online. It was very handy in that way. I registered for a stalking awareness course with St Mary's University in London, which was once a week, I think, and done online. So that was really good as well, just to get the, you know, proper knowledge on the stalker motivations. That's where I would have learned a lot about that. And, you know, my lecturer from the course was brilliant. We're still in contact now. And Una did that course as well. So that was really good for us to build up our own understanding of stalking, and then applied for the consent course as well to expand my knowledge there. And I really, really enjoyed that course. And I was able to get into that through recognised prior learning because I had a relevant life experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then once that finished, I was like, okay, now I need to start looking at undergrads. And to be honest, I really did not want to spend 4 years doing an undergrad. So I was like, I'm going to find a way to be able to swindle something here. So I did a lot of short courses online. There's a website called Future Learn, which is really good for just, you know, short little bricks of different information. So bought a subscription for that for a year. Did as many as I could. And then I actually was picking up one of the brochures for the postgraduate courses here for my friend, and I opened it on a page that said public advocacy and activism, and I was like, oh my god, there's a course on this. So I contacted the course coordinator, Fiona, and said, look, is there any way that you'd consider an application through relevant life experience or recognised prior learning, because I kind of had the two together then. So she was really open and said, yeah, okay, there's an entrance exam, so I had 2 weeks to do 2 essays, and lucky enough got into it then. So that was brilliant. And then as I moved through the masters, we got to the stage where we were on work placements. So I said I'd love to go back to where it started and go back to active consent. So I joined there for my work placement as a research assistant. Soon learned that I wasn't very good at analysing data, so they found other jobs for me, or I moved into outreach and workshop development, and now on the communications side of things, but still getting to, you know, be part of the development of new resources, new workshops, has been great. So yeah, it's been a bit of a journey, but it's been a great one, because although being stalked was probably the hardest thing that I have ever gone through and hopefully will ever go through, I really don't know what direction my life would have gone if that didn't happen. So in a way, I'm grateful to have gone through that to get to where I am now. And like, I never thought that I'd be doing a master's. Like, even the fact that I had tried to get to university the first time was huge for me. Because, yeah, I don't know, like, just, I suppose, where I was from or my school, you know, it was great, but there wasn't much motivation or even the thoughts of working in a university or getting to work with this program and work in this area has been amazing. So sometimes I'm still pinching myself and I'm like, how did this happen? But yeah.
That's amazing, Eve, and to just hear about that journey and how you've taken that experience and made change for other people. And you're obviously in the space now that you're continuing to make change for people and will do. I think that brings us nicely to the end of our podcast, unless there's anything that you didn't get a chance to say or anything you'd like to add.
Just like, thank you so much for kind of highlighting it again, and that people should know that if they, you know, think that maybe they can change something, if I did it, you can definitely do it.
Oh, that's a fantastic way to finish our podcast. It's been such an honour to be here with you today, Eve.
Thanks.
And I'll watch your career as you go on to make huge change. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And all that's left to do is just to thank our listeners. And invite them to join us for the next podcast.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Eve.
you.